Good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Community Forum number 2. My name is David Dustin. I'm the principal of Jaffrey Ridge Middle School and Conant High School, and I'm joined tonight by our counseling director.
Good evening. I'm Kim Baker, Director of Counseling.
And as the shortest member of the administrative team, I'm Heather Shulman, Assistant Principal of Teaching and Learning.
We're presenting at tonight's forum on 2 topics. The first is a brief discussion about our block scheduling transition happening next year. This is the second community forum that will include information about that topic. And then the second larger portion of tonight is focused around the 1 to 4 grading system that has been slowly rolling out in our district, in our school in particular, and what that's going to look like going into the next school year. There we go. So with both topics, I always like to start off with a reminder that our priority at Jaffrey Ridge Middle School and Conant High School is always in supporting our learners. And so anytime that we offer a community forum and solicit feedback or questions, it's because our goal is to make sure that we're not missing something or missing a communication point or missing a strategy that helps us to accomplish that goal. So I want to start there again. Our priority with block scheduling, as well as improving how we assess and score learning, is to better support our learners. Very briefly, because again, this is the second forum that has had this included, our JRMS schedule for next year will look very similar to this year. The schedule has generally worked well in the middle school. However, we are adding 1 instructional period for the school, which will help us to lower class sizes across our middle school while keeping that middle school model that has worked well in terms of the learning needs for those individuals. Every 2 periods in the JRMS schedule will align with 1 block in the high school schedule. This will allow for 8th graders to continue to take high school courses and earn high school credit, as well as even some 7th graders who do that. And we'll make sure that the staff that are shared between the middle and high school can continue to be shared effectively. Our grade 6 group, which is always in a transition, will continue to have 7 class periods, as well as a transition support period to help them make the jump to the middle school. The block schedule in the high school will allow us to do a few things. First is that with the budget situation in the district this year and the need for some reductions, this change has allowed our school to reduce appropriately without impacting the class offerings available to our learners. And more importantly, this is a change that we feel can offer some benefits to learning, including a better alignment to our CTE partnership with Conval School District. And I'll turn it over to Mrs. Shulman.
There are many different forms of daily schedules for middle and high schools across the country. And the research that we've conducted has demonstrated time and time again that the schedule itself, the schedule alone, does not predict the quality of learning. It is what the teachers do within that time frame. And that it will lead to further discussions we'll be having tonight about our instructional strategies and working with teachers for pacing instruction and assessment during the block.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the block looks like at the high school level. So most learners will have 4 blocks, 4 classes a day. Blocks will be approximately 88 minutes. So as Mr. Dustin mentioned earlier, 2 periods at the middle school level equals 1 block at the high school level. Some learners, especially our learners coming into 9th grade, will have what we call skinnies. And in that cases, our learners may have more than 4 classes a day. A skinny is a single period. So if we have learners that have skinnies, they'll have 2 skinnies within a block time. And some examples of classes that run in the skinny format for 9th graders are our math and our world language programs, along with some other semester classes. And just like our learners do now, some classes this year change at the semester. Most classes for our high school learners will change at second semester. So this provides us with the opportunity for students to double up in a particular area. So we have students that are interested in history, passionate about art, music, things that they want to explore a little bit further. So this allows our students to dive into that. It also allows our learners who maybe got behind a little bit here and there over the last few years to kind of catch up and be on track to graduate. So this is just an example of sample courses. So as I mentioned, most of the courses at the high school will be full credit courses lasting 88 minutes every single day for half the school year. So we'll essentially have 2 semesters. First day of school to sometime in January is first semester. Second semester is late January to the end of the school year. Some of the courses that will be running in the skinny format include Algebra 1, World Language, Band, and Chorus. Our AP courses, and this is a benefit to block. Currently, they are offered for about 47 minutes every single day for the school year. In the block format, we can offer those courses for 88 minutes for 3 quarters. And this allows our learners to be with the teachers for a longer period of time, right up until the time they take the exam. And then to balance things like AP courses or for allow our learners to take more electives or UA classes, some of our courses, and I'll give an example, like painting, ceramics, courses like that will be offered in what we call a quarter block. So just for 1 quarter of the school year. I'm going to turn it back over to Mrs. Schulman.
Our teachers have been engaged in a great deal of professional development throughout the months of April, May, and now continuing through June. And we've had 3 goals that we've been working on with our teachers. Number 1, to revise our current curriculum, our current learning goals, more based on power standards, meaning our teachers have collaborated to identify the most essential curriculum, new skills, new content areas that must be directly taught and assessed within the school year. Number 2, instructional strategies. We've been researching and discussing a variety of different instructional strategies that pulls us away from the old-fashioned traditional teacher lecturing for extended period of time and have the learners have more active engagement practicing with the new content and the new skills. And lastly, we've been working on having teachers discuss and create plans where they are taking all of their information they've learned and implement it into their planning. And this models what we do with our learners in the classroom. Introduce new content, new skills, discuss, practice it, and then apply.
So at this point, our staff in the high school have gone through the PD that Mrs. Schulman just shared, and we feel that they're ready to make the adjustment into block for next year in a way that won't just be combining 2 periods together, but truly focusing on the learning that can take place. The other piece of what has been happening for several years, but excuse me, is reaching ahead in our school in the coming year is the movement towards utilizing our learning goals, which we call learning progressions in our school district, for a true 1 to 4 proficiency style of grading and assessment. So just a little bit of history of the sort of slow process we've taken to get to where we're going this year. Back in the 2018-2019 school year, our school implemented the first elements of the strategic design and district policies around grading and assessing by separating habits of work from academic grades on report cards. And that has been in place since that school year. And this is not new at this point, that on report cards, all of our learners receive work habit scores in one area of their report card for each course, and then the academic grade that reflects only summative assessments of their learning. That same year, we also instituted a retake policy that allows learners to reassess in a proficiency type of environment, as well as submit work late without penalty, because again, that lateness was more of a work habit focus. So that's now a sort of old trick for our district in the sense that we've already been doing that for several years. And we recognized at the time that that was a pretty substantial shift that would take some time to sort of become comfortable to our learners and staff and families. This current school year, our middle school math teachers have piloted 2 important elements of moving to the next place of the 1 to 4 grading system. First, our math teachers in the middle school have piloted a learning management system called Otis, which we'll talk more about in just a little bit. And the second is that our middle school math teachers and really a focus on aligning how they assess math work in their classrooms better with the standardized assessment that we use called SAS, have also been using exclusively 1 to 4 grades tied specifically to learning goals. So we've used that this year as a pilot with that program to help prepare other teachers and departments to be ready for that. And that brings us to the upcoming school year, where at this point, based on the work of our teacher teams and really their movement to say we're ready for this and our learners are ready for this, going into next school year, every single teacher in the middle school and all teachers except the high school science department in the high school will be utilizing both Otis as a learning management system and 1 to 4 grades to report learning on specific learning goals. This will not translate to the end of term or end of course grades, which will continue to be sort of translated, I guess, into a 0 to 100 system. But what parents and learners will see primarily is report cards that have 1 to 4 grades tied to specific learning goals. We're projecting, and this is just a projection at this point, because again, this is a process that has to have community time and involvement and lots of ironing out before we make that leap. But our current projection and goal is within another school year to perhaps 2 school years into the future, we'll begin having transcripts also utilizing the 1 to 4 grades for incoming freshmen of that school year. We will not disrupt the existing transcripts for learners at any point in time, but when this change does happen, we'll begin with the freshman class of that year. Whoops. So one thing that we have to think about, and that drives the conversation around grades, and it's never a settled question. I mean, I did an entire thesis around grading because I was interested in terms of where we've been in the past. And we started off in public education in one type of grading that more closely mirrored 1 to 4, and then started to replace it with the credit-based system with 0 to 100. It's been sort of all over the place. But so there are some things that are consistent in our goals and desires for why we use grades. The first is for teachers to inform how we do instruction in the classroom. We need to have an assessment of learning that's recognizable, that a teacher can then translate to how they support learners. So no matter what we do with grades, that has to remain a critical piece of what we have in place. The second purpose for why schools use grades is documenting progress for learners and families on specific areas that the learner has thrived in and specific areas where they need more growth. And the last is to provide benchmarks that can inform later types of learning, whether that be the next course in a sequence or post-secondary learning or things like that. So I'm just putting this up here because part of why our district has continued to shift its approach to grading and assessing is to better capture a balance of these 3 things. And I'll show you what I mean on the next slide. So in a traditional 0 to 100 system, and I know we've talked about this as a district in the past, but a lot of times you might see on a report card that a student has an 80% in, let's just say, Algebra 1. And an 80% is generally considered to be a decent or a good grade. You might see that translated in another school as a B- or something like that. But the question that often comes up, and where we get a lot of questions over the summertime, especially in relation to these 0 to 100 grades and standardized assessments, is what does that 80% actually tell a learner or their parents about how their child is doing, in this case, in algebra? When you have a system that averages on a 0 to 100 with assessments, you could have a situation where this individual scored 100% and is really well-versed in factoring polynomials. However, when it comes to solving one-step equations, maybe they only scored 60% on those assessments. That gives you your average of 80, but I would be concerned with this individual's knowledge and skill of solving one-step equations. That's masked by that 80%. Did this learner struggle with a skill of integer computation, but was really good at solving equations? Again, we wouldn't know that from this grade because it's just a number at the end of the course. What skills do they still need to work on? It's not super clear. So when we look back on the purposes for grading, it's hard with this static 0 to 100 sort of overall average to really know truly what a learner needs more support on as they look to the next part of their learning versus what they have great strength in already. This type of grade hides strengths and weaknesses behind a number and makes it more difficult for all 3 of the goals of grading to be accomplished.
A little bit more explanation with our 1 through 4 progression scale. The level 1 is emerging, and that is when the learner is demonstrating evidence to the teachers that he or she is beginning to show some understanding. However, there's still a great deal of teacher adult support needed. as the learner gains more skills, gains more content knowledge through practice, through guided instruction by the teacher, he or she may go to level 2 developing. And you can see by the arrows that it starts to progress from I understand very little to I'm understanding some. And at that point, you have a little bit, you have diminished adult support. Level 3 is the goal, the learning goal. We are striving to get every one of our learners at the level of proficiency. And that means that our learners can consistently and independently demonstrate understanding of content, of subject, and or a new skill. Level 4 is advanced, and that is also an independent demonstration of understanding of the content and skill. That's where the learner independently goes above and beyond what was directly taught and synthesizes, combines, creates something new and different from what was taught in the classroom. All learners are introduced to levels 1, 2, and 3, and it is up to the learner if he or she is ready to give the level 4 task a try. And this is just another way of showing the progression from 1 through 4. So what do our teachers use and what do our learners use to identify what specific knowledge and skills are at a level 1, 2, 3, and 4? So I've shared with you an example from our 8th grade social studies teacher. Mr. Norby gave me permission to share this particular learning goal. The goal is at the level 3. That's where we strive to get every learner if possible. You can see the 1, 2, 3, 4 along the left side, the left column. The proficiency descriptor, that guides the teacher and lets the teacher know what he or she will directly instruct and assess. The reasoning skill is the level of thinking that the learners are expected to use. And the resources are notes, assignments, sometimes links to practice for the teacher and learner. Everything we teach is directly aligned with state and national standards. A typical course may have 10 of these documents, 10 learning goals, and that drives the instruction for the entire course.
So that's a lot of information about learning goals and things like that. And we don't expect families and parents to understand maybe that element of it to the degree that we're talking about here today. We provided that as some context and background just so families can know what it is that we're trying to teach and assess as we make this transition. What families will interact with is what we call a learning management system, which is Otis. Currently, most teachers are using Google Classroom as their learning management system. This is where teachers can make announcements, store assignments and assessments, and communicate scores to families. Right now, because Google Classroom is not a proficiency-based learning management system, it isn't aligned with our district's learning goals, families often have to go to Google Classroom to try to keep track of how their learners completing assignments, but to actually see their learners' grade in the course or how they're doing, a second system, Web to School, has to be used. Otis will actually replace Google Classroom entirely for almost all of our school, with the exception of high school science. Assessments will be created in Otis and placed directly in that system so families can see those assessments. The assessments will be directly linked with learning goals in language that's easy for families and learners to see and understand. And the grade on the assessment will also be placed specifically in Otis, tied directly to the assessment that's attached to those learning goals. So what families and learners will be able to see quickly is not only what assignments are being assigned and done much more concretely than with Google Classroom, but also what is that translating to in terms of my child's progress on each of these specific learning goals that are being instructed to in this course. There will still be an overall decaying average for the course. A decaying average means that at each additional time that a learning goal is assessed, the previous instances of that, the further back they go, lose weight over time. So the average will always reflect more heavily the most recent attempts at a learning goal. Again, all of our teams except the high school science team will be utilizing this tool and this grading system next year. And for now, because again, our system of record is still web to school, we will be having teachers translate the overall decaying average for their course and place that into web to school in a 0 to 100 scale to continue that consistency for our current learners. Families will not need to look in web to school for that purpose unless they choose to, because again, that will be directly tied back to with much more detail the learning goals and the 1 to 4 grades associated with Otis. And this system will allow for those, all the sort of pieces of what a family would need to see about their child's progress to be in one place. What is the grade that they've earned on each assignment? How do those assignments link to specific learning goals? And thus, what's their child's progress on those skills and knowledge? And how are they doing overall in the course? All in one place, no more need to juggle platforms. And again, much more specific detail for their learner. So the next steps that we're going to be looking at, again, this year, implementing Otis and 1 to 4 report cards out of Otis. That will be done for all courses in the middle school and everything except the science courses in the high school. And that will be starting this upcoming fall. Next year, we'll be adding CHS science to this Otis and 1 to 4 grade system. And then again, our goal is to begin using the 1 to 4 transcript either the following year or 2 years out with the incoming freshman year, the class of 2028. The previous classes who are at that point will be sophomores, juniors, and seniors will continue to have converted to a 100-point scale, all courses that, again, we don't disrupt their transcripts that at that time will already be underway. And we will continue to offer some community forums around these topics. I'll let you talk about some of the things that we're kind of working on here. You're doing that work.
So in July, we're going to host a panel that includes members of admissions counselors from various colleges across New Hampshire, but also hopefully from New England. These are college reps that have already been here at our school, either in the fall visiting with our students, or we're here for the career fair. We've already engaged in those conversations. They'll talk about how they view the 1 to 4 grading scale. They've already provided some feedback to us. It really, in their eyes, is about how we explain the system that we're using, and our school profile becomes critical at that point in kind of explaining what they're seeing on the transcript. But they'll be here to kind of present, talk about what they see, how they view it as admissions counselors, and answer any questions that families have. And then in August, we'll have another community forum around Otis and the 1 to 4 grading.
Be sure to attend or watch the video from our August Otis and 1 to 4 grading, because this is when we're going to be previewing with the community our new form of Otis report card. And that will be very exciting.
So there are a couple of questions that often come up anytime a discussion around 1 to 4 grades comes up. So I'll just touch on some of those right now before we turn it over to our in-person and digital audiences. One thing that families often ask is when we do start using 1 to 4 grading, what is that going to mean for post-secondary options? And again, that's sort of what Mrs. Baker was talking about with having that panel come in. It is really important to note that many schools across the country already use a full 1 to 4 grading system, including transcripts that only have 1 to 4 grades, and their learners enter college at the same pace or perhaps even a stronger pace than we currently do. So it is not unheard of, and we won't be trailblazing in a negative way when it comes to that type of a system. Another question that often comes up is the question of honor roll and high honors and how 1 to 4 grading will impact those pieces. In the near term, with us continuing to convert the quarter grades into a 0 to 100 scale, this change in assessment grading should not impact honor roll or high honor roll. As we continue to progress towards having quarter grades and transcripts reflect 1 to 4 grades only, that's when we'll have more of a conversation about honor roll and high honors, what that looks like down the road and things like that. So those are the two that have typically come up to us. At this point, I'd like to turn it over for any questions from either our live or in-person audience.
Yeah, so this is Nicholas Handy, communication coordinator, running the live stream. Just want to explain kind of the ground rules for both audiences. For our people person in the live audience, we have a microphone right here. If you choose to make a public comment, you won't actually hear yourself, but it's just for the purpose of picking up in the live stream. So if you choose to make a comment or a question, you can use this microphone. The online audience, if you guys would like to either use the hand raise feature, and then you can actually speak your question that way. Or if you would like to just put something in the chat, I noticed we already have a few things in the chat. I'm happy to read those out loud. And then we can just, I guess, kind of go until questions are done. So is there anything, comments you'd like to make? All right, so our physical audience is exhausted. At this point, we're going to move on to the digital audience. I do have 2 questions in the chat, and I can start with those. And then obviously, if anybody chooses to add in additional questions or to actually want to speak the questions, we can go from there. So first question is, why is science excluded from the rollout?
So, this effort of rolling out Otis and 1-4 grading, with this being the time that we are really moving forward with momentum, was very much teacher driven, with teams feeling like their learning goals, their team dynamics, and their assessment practices were ready for this shift without causing a huge disruption to their learners. Our science team is in the process of really working on their courses in the high school and developing that team dynamic for how they assess learning. And they felt like one additional year was really important for them to have those pieces firmly in place before they make the jump to assessing with the 1-4 scale and using Otis. So it's nothing negative about that team. I think it's actually very positive that they want to make sure that they have that time to really get that right before they make that adjustment.
And if I may add, the science department at the high school has really gone above and beyond with introducing brand new elective courses, such as Northeastern ecology, marine biology, chemistry of cooking, environmental science. And that department has so many wonderful electives. We're still working together to build the curriculum there. So we weren't ready yet, but they will be soon.
All right, and the next question is, will college level RS classes align with your new grading system or still align with New Hampshire Community College grading systems?
So this question came up when we first made the separation of work habits from academic scores and began accepting retakes of assessments. The colleges typically, they work with high schools all over New Hampshire. And again, other schools have already made adjustments like these, or in some cases further along the road. And sometimes they ask for what's called a parallel grading system, where the initial grade or assessment for a test or a project is placed in a grade book. And then the school level, policies here apply, and we would send that first grade book off to the college. That's sometimes what they've asked to do. In other cases, they accept whatever the school-based system is, as long as it aligns with the standards and expectations of their college courses, because even some colleges also allow for this type of grading to take place. So again, the fortunate thing is that the community college system, and in particular, Nashua Community College, does work with so many other New Hampshire schools who are on the same journey, that the resource pool is pretty rich, and they're able to work with our school to support these changes.
All right, those are the 2 questions we had in the chat. Just want to give people one more opportunity. Again, physical audience can use the microphone. Remote audience can either put something into the chat and I'll read it out loud, or you can use the hand raise feature and ask the question yourself. I guess we'll just give like a minute or so.
And while we're waiting, we are also anticipating, as the school year begins, offering some nighttime sort of, I don't want to call them forums, but hands-on perhaps events with families that might be interested, to help them access Otis, help them look through the portal and the platform at different courses, and really have a live, almost like a training session with families who are interested in that, to help them navigate and better understand how to look at and interpret what they're seeing in Otis as well. So in addition to these forums, which are much more informational and question-based, we will be offering some of those hands-on sort of sessions with families and learners who are interested as well. And we anticipate those happening in September and throughout October as well.
I guess just one more note on my end. Again, Nicholas Handy, the communication coordinator. We do put all these live streamed events, the forums, up on our YouTube page. So for anybody who as a friend or somebody who maybe couldn't make it but wants to know what happened tonight and have some more information, it should be up early next week on the YouTube page, and we might even share it out, depending on social media, website, email, so on. So we are trying to make these informational, while they're information dense, we're trying to make them accessible for people.
And we would also invite any individual or in the community who hears of this, sees our presentation, has additional questions that they may not have been comfortable asking in a public session like this. Mrs. Schulman is always available for meetings. I'll just put her on the spot. Mrs. Baker, I know, has met with several families about post-secondary items and progression of learning, and I'm always happy to meet as well. So please reach out to any of us, and we're happy to meet and discuss this further, look at what examples might look like of different types of grades, of products being graded on the system and things like that as well.
All right, I don't have any other questions, so I think we're good to go for tonight.
All right. Thank you very much for being here, and we'll see folks in July at our next forum. Have a great night.